Welcome back, everyone. Well, now that we have the procedural foliage system turned on in our editor preferences right here, procedural foliage, we got that turned on. We want to go ahead in this video to create a procedural foliage spawner asset. In this video, we're also going to talk about what a procedural foliage spawner asset does and then discuss and demonstrate briefly how the procedural foliage spawner works. So first things first, we have to create this foliage spawner asset. And we're going to do so here inside of our content landscape foliage folder. And we're going to right click in some empty space over here. And in our right click menu, we're going to come under foliage. And we've got this procedural foliage spawner option available to us. Now note, this option is only available because here in our editor preferences, we turned on the procedural foliage system. If I had this turned off and I right clicked and went under foliage, I would not find that asset type. So let's turn that back on. Procedural foliage in our editor preferences. And then we're going to right click foliage, procedural foliage spawner, and I'm going to call this asset PFS for procedural foliage spawner underscore forest. All right. So what we can do with this asset type is we can place this actor into our level. Let's go ahead and do that. And when we do that, we will see that we've got this little yellow volume out here. So what we essentially did in placing a procedural foliage spawner out here is we actually added a procedural foliage volume to our level. Now you may be saying, wait, what's going on? This is a procedural foliage spawner asset. We just added a procedural foliage volume. How does that compute? Well, if I scroll down in our list of details here, we did in fact add a procedural foliage volume. The engine is smart enough to know that that's what you were trying to add, and it populated it. It filled it out with a procedural foliage spawner that we had created. Now, this is the easy way to go about adding a procedural foliage volume to your level that is populated with your procedural foliage spawner. But you could also, in your modes panel, search for procedural foliage volume and add one of these guys to your level like so. So here I'm essentially adding a second procedural foliage volume, but this is an empty container. As you can see with this procedural foliage volume, it doesn't have a foliage spawner slotted in. So if I wanted to, I could slot this in here, but I really only want one of these foliage volumes out here at one time. So I'm just going to delete this one. So that's just a handy trick to know when you go to place your procedural foliage spawner into your level, you're actually adding a procedural foliage volume to your level and populating its details with your procedural foliage spawner. Now inside of this bounds volume that we get to set, and we can set that right here in our brush settings. Let's set that right away, shall we? X value of 10,000. I'm going to go not super big. I'll go 10,000 for the Y, and let's go 10,000 for the Z. So that is the volume in which we want to procedurally spawn some foliage. Inside this bounds volume, we can specify the foliage types we'd like to be present inside. And inside each foliage type, we can specify the rules about where and how that foliage type should spawn and grow. All right, so now we need to populate our procedural foliage spawner with some foliage types. So we need to double click on this asset, and that's where we can specify that. So right up here, under our list of foliage types, we can add some foliage types. We're not going to cover any of these settings for the time being. Just going to click just one time. And for our first foliage type asset, we are going to add, let's do our tree. Where is our tree? There it is. There's our tree. And note that we can add multiples right here. I'm just going to do one for the time being, but you can add multiples. I'm just going to delete that guy, delete that guy. We're going to save it out. And currently our procedural foliage spawner is just going to spawn in the tree. Now, we've got this all set up, but I still don't see any trees that are procedurally spawned. What is going on? Well, with our procedural foliage volume here selected, under our details panel, right underneath where we've got the foliage spawner, we've got this re-simulate button. Now, if I click this, you will see we have now procedurally spawned some trees inside of this volume. If you didn't see that, I'm just going to do Control Z to undo that. What may have been your problem is that your volume here might not have been intersecting the ground. If it is off the ground like that and you try to resimulate, you will not see anything. It has to be intersecting the ground. So just like that, resimulate, and you will see some trees. Now, obviously, this is a very dense forest. It's not exactly what I want, but that is where these different rules that we can set up for our spawner come in. That is going to be coming up in the next videos. But that is going to do it all for this one, guys. How to create a procedural foliage spawner and add it to your level. See you in the next video.